It's important and culturally appropriate that we acknowledge the spirits of the ancestors, our elders, traditional owners and contemporary custodians from the nations of the Kulin in Melbourne, Wadawurrung in Ballarat, Darug and Strathfield, Camaragal in North Sydney, Yagara and Turrbal nations from Brisbane, Kaurna in Adelaide and Ngunnawal in Canberra. We're not doing this as an act of political correctness, but as one which connects us all to ourselves, to each other, and to country itself. We do this as a means through story to connect us to an Australian history that is hundreds and thousands of years old.
Ned, my curriculum is already crowded. How can I be expected to include Indigenous knowings as well?
If you think about embedding Indigenous knowings in your units and you focus on how this can nourish, add depth to what your unit stories, it's a more comfortable focus. It's not deficit thinking. Indigenous storying explains, explores, and projects our being, our connections, and our relationships. Indigenous storying is different to Western stories. It is a process and a form of communicating Indigenous knowings. But it also engages different people, telling bits of a story. They each speak what they've come to know through their relationships with country, through their place within the web of relationships that exists in that place. Indigenous storying isn't linear, it's cyclic, and even spiral, turning inward on itself at different points. Remember, it's not about answering a question. Indigenous storying is about finding a bundle of possibilities.
So Ned, where do I start?
Such a good question. Ask yourself what the course you are designing the curriculum for is about. At the level of the reason or the rationale of the course, you need to think about how the course engages with Indigenous knowings and how these knowings contribute to a more holistic vision of the knowledge, sense-making and skill development that graduates will need to be productive practitioners in the worlds in which they will ultimately participate. Then ask yourself how these knowings are embedded in the course-level learning outcomes. Next, when looking at the units which comprise the course, ask yourself, what is my unit about? Why is it in the course? What are my intended outcomes? How can embedding Indigenous knowings enhance and add depth to my unit? You can even try brain blooming your responses. Go online and see what information is available. There's quite a lot of information already there for educators like us. Find a story that relates to what you're doing. Look at it holistically. Look at the pattern. Then look at the bits, the threads in the pattern, the colours and shapes. Let's look at an example. If I'm teaching a unit in law, maybe constitution law, or I'm teaching a unit on accounting in business or geometry and maths, let's find a story. So I found a story by Sally Morgan. Sally was speaking to her grandfather one day about Captain James Cook, and he said to her, that fella, Captain Cook, didn't know how to read the signs. You see, what they went on to explore was that when Captain Cook arrived in Botany Bay and got off the ship, the Endeavour, he walked up to a tree, carved his name, the ship's name, and the date on the tree. To Captain Cook, this was a mark claiming possession for the British Crown. It was a mark that sounded a warning to other colonising nations. To the Guigal and Cummigal clans, this act was a transgression of ancient laws. It was mutilation of the tree and all of the relations connected to it and with it. So let's reflect on how this story can be translated into those units in law, maths and business.
Oh, Ned, I'm afraid of doing the wrong thing.
Don't be afraid, you fellas, be bold. As with anything we teach for the first time, we need to check our sources. And remember, in terms of Indigenous knowings, we're not searching for a right answer. We're storying a bundle of possibilities. You know, the what if. In the example above, when we teach, we can discuss the different clans, the Gweagal and the Kamiyagal, and how different maps, different people refer to different Aboriginal groups in this area. Check with the local Aboriginal Land Council and see how they refer to the people in the area you're teaching about. The issue from a Western knowledge perspective is one of identifying boundaries that surveyors developed and which exist on maps today, informing story, language, and law, especially native title, and so on. Aboriginal people didn't create the maps. Our view of the boundaries, even our concept of boundaries, are different. It's really important we teach our students how to be critically reflective and inclusive. This is a process as much as it is about the content. It's also important to check that it's okay to make the information that you're sharing public by asking an appropriate Indigenous person. Start a dialogue with different people, eh? We all have different experiences and understandings, and remember, we're looking for a bundle of possibilities, not one right answer to a question.
So, Ned, can you give me some more ideas about where I can get information?
Yes, sure. If you know Aboriginal people in your area or Aboriginal community organisations, you can contact them for information. But this has to be a two-way process. It can't be us just bleeding Aboriginal people of their intellectual property, eh? Think about ways there can be reciprocity. Look online to see how to engage with correct cultural protocols when speaking to First Nations peoples. So go online. There's a lot of information available for educators. Check out the LTC website for links to different sites and resources. If you have information, share it through this portal. Put your ideas up and discuss with your colleagues through this space. The portal's like organic. You know, it's like country, it's alive, and it's dependent on nourishing the relationships and connections inspired by and for it. I know I can hear you saying, but this takes time I don't have. You know what? All good curriculum takes time, but we all know that. But the rewards of creative curriculum that embrace diverse storing is both powerful and empowering. Once you've developed the material you have, it's there as a foundation forever. You can build on this for future classes in less time.
But what if I make a mistake?
We all make mistakes, eh? And this is what we grow from. It's important in this context to acknowledge the mistake. Gee, I remember a colleague of mine telling me off for using and writing Aboriginal law, LORE, in a document I was drafting for him. This comment made me realise that law, LORE, is associated to folklore, something that's old, possibly even ancient, but it's not real, it's fictional. Whereas law, LAW, is associated with fact, with reality. It's such a different concept. I've never done it since, and my depth of understanding grew astronomically from this point on.
There are so many Aboriginal groups saying different things. Which one do I pick?
Remember, Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples have many different nations. It's not surprising people have different ideas and different expressions of this. It's not surprising because Indigenous knowings emanate from country, which we now know is organic. It's a place where everything lives in constant motion. There are, for example, many different stories about the seven sisters who became stars. And every story is true within its own space. How enriching is this diversity? Diversity of understanding and storing amongst Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous peoples alike. We learn about the seven sisters, or Pleiades, the Orion Belt. Embedding and embodying such diversity is what being Australian is.
So Ned, now I know the difference between adding Indigenous perspectives and embedding Indigenous knowings, how to get started, and where to get the information I need. So where to from here?
Congratulations! You've already begun the journey by just asking this question. You are too deadly